The last week was perhaps the most dramatic and important week in Polish politics over the last 2 years. President Duda's dramatic decision to veto 2 out of 3 of the government's flagship reform bills of the judicial and legal system have sent an earthquake through the Polish political system, and the implications, I think, will be very significant. The reasons why President Duda decided to veto the legislation, although a very big surprise, can be easily explained by his concerns that the proposals gave to the Minister of Justice and potentially the government, the ruling party, too much power over judicial nominations and general control of the Poland's court system. However, leaving aside those arguments, what are the real impacts of this decision? And for party leader Jarosław Kaczyński, the leader of Law and Justice, I think he and his colleagues and the government will face 3 major challenges as a result of this dramatic decision. The first challenge, of course, is President Duda himself, who through this decision has emerged as an autonomous and important player on the Polish political scene, no longer happy to simply sign off on every piece of legislation that the government sends to him, but saying very clearly to Law and Justice that there are limits to which I will be an uncritical administrator of the government's legislative program. And that inserts into the political process a very challenging partner for Jarosław Kaczyński, because of course President Duda will be seeking re-election in 2020. Secondly, of course, it also raises the issue of the future of the Law and Justice Party itself. Until now, the authority of Jarosław Kaczyński had been very much based on the fact that he was the only man capable of taking real decisions within the party and making things happen. Now he has to face President Duda, and it's not inconceivable that in the long run this could presage a division of Poland's conservative right-wing politics into 2 broader camps, one much more traditional, conservative, patriotic under Jarosław Kaczyński, and potentially a new formation slowly taking shape, slowly but surely, around President Duda in a much more centrist direction. The third challenge for Jarosław Kaczyński will come, not unsurprisingly, from Brussels. Mr. Timmermans from the European Commission has already said that Poland faces the prospect of Article 7 of the European Treaty being initiated, which may lead to sanctions being placed against Poland. And there is also a broader debate of the impact of this decision on Poland's ability to negotiate successfully the new tranche of EU funds that may come to Poland after 2020 in the next EU budget. Although most people on the question of Brussels are a little more sanguine, saying that ultimately the fact that you need a complete unanimity within the European Council means that Poland actually at the end of the day may be not facing as dramatic a challenge from Brussels as Mr. Timmermans would like. All that having been said, going back to the domestic scene, the big question that still remains to be seen is what benefit the opposition can gain from the crisis over the last 2 weeks. How will this affect Law and Justice in the opinion polls? Actually, the fact of this controversy may have helped somewhat Law and Justice by allowing it to consolidate its electoral support. And until now, there hasn't been much movement in the opinion polls. The other question, of course, is will this be to the benefit of the main opposition party, the Civic Platform, led by Grzegorz Schetyna? The mass protests that were on the streets of Warsaw and other cities weren't actually driven by the Civic Platform party. They seem to have a strength of their own, and it may presage also a re-altering of relationships within the opposition, as much as the protests will have driven a shift within the current Law and Justice Party. It remains to be seen what the long-term effects of this crisis will be. That will only become clear in the coming months when the new presidential judicial reform proposals re-enter Parliament, and then there will be a major showdown, I think, between the Law and Justice leadership and those allied to the President about the shape of that legislation. And we'll also be able to see how this is feeding out into the support for the government. But the next 2 years, for sure, will be much more interesting in terms of the twists and turns of the political scene than perhaps they have been over the last 2. So interesting times ahead.